I knew my 24 years of blood, sweat, solder, and system architecture at Vanguard Automation were officially dead. The moment Brandon Mercer looked at me like I was a broken fax machine waiting for the recycling bin. He did not say the word legacy with respect or nuance. He said it with the tight, sterile sneer of a man who believed wisdom was an obstacle to next quarter's profit margins. I sat across from Ronson's old mahogany desk, which Brandon had stripped of character and replaced with a brushed nickel lamp, a plastic succulent, and a sleek glass tabletop that reflected his spotless white designer sneakers. Brandon was 32 years old, possessed an expensive business degree from a private university, and carried himself with the unearned swagger of someone who thought repeating corporate buzzwords was the same thing as creating value. He took a slow sip from an artisanal cold brew coffee cup, scrolled through a colorful chart on his laptop showing overhead payroll reductions, and gave me the rehearsed, sympathetic smile they teach in executive coaching seminars. He told me that Vanguard was undergoing a fundamental paradigm shift toward agile, artificial intelligence-driven infrastructure, and that my traditional engineering methodology no longer aligned with the company's forward vector. I did not blink, nor did I raise my voice. At 48 years old, I had spent half my life inside these brick walls, long before venture capitalists bought out Walter Kaplan's original garage workshop back in the late 90s. I remembered when this very office had a heavy wooden drafting table, where Walter and I would sit with tea mugs, using 2H graphite pencils to draft mechanical stress vectors for our first automated conveyor lines. Back then, engineering meant understanding material tolerance, thermal expansion, and physical wear. I remembered my father, an industrial machinist in Cleveland, who had carried a heavy steel toolbox stamped 1978, telling me that true craftsmanship could never be faked with flashy rhetoric. But under Brandon's management, quiet, focused engineering labs had been dismantled to make way for open-plan glass enclosures, neon motivation signs, and ping-pong tables that no actual technician ever touched. I had personally survived 3 major corporate recessions, hand-wiring the baseline logic trees that kept our heavy robotic assembly arms from ripping themselves off their concrete anchors during high-speed production cycles. I had personally calibrated every high-precision welder on line 3 during 90-degree summer shifts when the central air conditioning system failed and upper management stayed home in their air-conditioned estates. During the terrible winter blizzard of 6 years ago, when the local electrical grid failed and threatened to freeze our hydraulic lines, I had stayed in the plant for 36 straight hours, manually bypassing frozen relays to save $60 million in industrial machinery. I knew every groan of the steel trusses, every electrical harmonic on the main distribution panels, and every line of custom microcode running through our legacy controllers. Yet here was a young man who had been in 3rd grade when I laid the first Ethernet cables through the ceiling rafters, telling me with absolute condescension that I was an impediment to corporate evolution. Brandon leaned forward across his glass desk, tapping his gold fountain pen against his leather notebook to emphasize his points. He informed me that internal payroll efficiency metrics indicated my senior engineering salary could be redistributed to fund 4 junior software integrators who understood cloud-native paradigms and automated deployment pipelines. He spoke about zero-touch automation, disruptive synergy, and seamless digital transformation, as if they were magical spells that could instantly replace 24 years of practical troubleshooting and physical diagnostics. When he finished his speech, he leaned back in his ergonomic leather chair and asked if I had any final comments before Human Resources processed my separation paperwork. I simply asked if facilities would provide a standard cardboard box for my personal possessions, or if I should retrieve the canvas tote bag I brought on my very first day as a junior technician back in 1998. Brandon blinked, clearly disappointed that I had not given him the emotional outburst, angry shouting, or desperate pleading he could log with Human Resources to justify his coldness. He waved a dismissive hand, returned his eyes to his glowing laptop screen, and told me that security would deactivate my security badge within 15 minutes. Packing my cubicle took less than 10 minutes because I had seen the writing on the wall months ago. There was not much left to collect, just a few worn leather notebooks filled with mathematical proofs, a stainless steel thermos with faded block lettering, a small box of precision German calipers, and a framed blueprint resting against the divider wall. I picked up the frame and ran my fingers over the clean glass. It was an original schematic of Varian logic, drawn by hand in dark India ink with precise mechanical measurements written in the margins. It was the architectural backbone of modular automation, a system I had perfected on my own time, on my own workbench in my garage, using my own personal savings. I slipped the framed drawing into my tote bag like a quiet secret. As I walked down the main corridor toward the exit, passing the old calibration bay where my analog meters and paper logs still sat on the shelf, the building felt strangely hollow and sterile. The young software interns did not look up from their dual-curved monitors. To them, I was just another anonymous older employee being quietly cycled out to lower corporate overhead. Only Clara Miller, our lead logistics coordinator, who had weathered 20 years of corporate reorganizations alongside me, stopped near the reception desk. She looked at my canvas bag, then up at my face, her eyes carrying the tight, solemn expression reserved for hospital waiting rooms. She offered a soft, knowing nod as I turned in my electronic keycard. She asked if I was going to be all right, her voice trembling slightly with genuine concern for a colleague who had saved the plant from dozens of midnight line meltdowns. I smiled back at her, a calm, steady smile that made her pause, because she had seen that exact smile twice before in 20 years. She knew that when I looked that composed, it meant I had already calculated the physical and logical outcomes 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the building. Walking out into the cold November rain of Ohio, I sat inside my pickup truck for a long moment, listening to the steady rhythm of water hitting the metal roof. My security badge deactivated with a quiet electronic beep at the gate before I even started the ignition, a final petty demonstration of Brandon's automated efficiency. But inside my chest, there was no anger, panic, or grief. Those unproductive emotions had burned away months ago when I first recognized Brandon's reckless ambition and total lack of technical competence. What remained was a cold, surgical clarity. Brandon thought he had just executed a routine corporate cleanup, severing a high-salary legacy engineer to impress the board of directors and boost his quarterly metrics. He had no idea that he had just evicted the only human being who understood how the entire facility functioned. More importantly, he had no idea that the multi-million-dollar software platform he was preparing to unveil to investors on Monday was built entirely on top of my proprietary intellectual property. Protected under federal law, and registered solely to my name. The Monday following my dismissal, Vanguard Automation hosted its grand annual corporate town hall, an event that Clara later described to me in detail during a quiet phone conversation. Brandon Mercer stood on a raised temporary stage under rented blue spotlights in the main auditorium, wearing a black-fitted turtleneck, tailored trousers, and pristine white designer sneakers. He paced the floor with a wireless headset microphone pinned to his collar, gesturing dramatically like a tech founder presenting a breakthrough consumer device. Behind him, a massive high-definition projector screen flashed bold, stylized letters declaring the dawn of a new operational epoch. Varian Dynamics. Brandon spoke with the theatrical fervor of a corporate evangelist, promising visiting board members and private equity investors a 40% increase in manufacturing throughput alongside a 60% reduction in manual labor costs. He paraded sleek flowcharts, animated render videos of autonomous assembly lines, and high-level system diagrams that showcased a self-correcting neural network governing the entire production facility. He proudly announced that Vanguard had invested $4,500,000 into acquiring and integrating this revolutionary architecture, claiming it would eliminate human error forever. Standing near the back of the auditorium beside the main control console, Clara watched as Brandon displayed a comparative slide meant to highlight the company's technological evolution. On the left side of the screen, Brandon had placed a high-resolution photograph of my old engineering desk, complete with hand-drawn blueprints, physical calibration tools, analog multimeters, and a paper wall calendar. He chuckled into his microphone, referring to it as the primitive era of legacy stubbornness and manual gedgework that had held Vanguard back for decades. The room offered a few polite, nervous chuckles from junior managers eager to protect their careers and stay in Brandon's good graces. But Clara did not laugh. She stared directly at the architectural flowcharts on the main slide. Beneath the glossy new corporate logo and the artificial intelligence marketing buzzword, she recognized the underlying node structures instantly. The variable names, the recursive feedback loops, the state-machine transitions, and the unique dual-channel safety protocols were unmistakable. It was Varian logic, the exact framework I had designed, refined, and documented in my home workshop over 7 grueling years. Brandon was claiming sole corporate ownership of a complex system he could not even read, dressed up in marketing jargon and venture capital arrogance. What Brandon did not know, because he had never bothered to audit the historical archives of the company he was hired to manage, was how Varian logic actually came into existence. 7 years earlier, when Walter Kaplan was still running Vanguard with a steady hand and honest engineering principles, I realized that our factory machinery was becoming an unmanageable patchwork of aging hardware and conflicting vendor software. I spent my evenings and weekends in my home workshop in Columbus, investing over $50,000 of my personal savings into high-speed logic analyzers, microcontrollers, custom circuit boards, and industrial test rigs. I created Varian logic as a modular, self-optimizing control architecture capable of retrofitting legacy industrial machinery without requiring a complete teardown of the physical infrastructure. It utilized low-latency interrupt handlers, adaptive sensor calibration algorithms, and modular plug-and-play interfaces that allowed 30-year-old hydraulic presses to communicate seamlessly with modern digital buses. It was elegant, lightning fast, and bulletproof. When I presented an early prototype to Walter Kaplan back in his office, I offered Vanguard a generous corporate licensing agreement that would have granted the company non-exclusive rights to use the software for a modest fee, while I retained full ownership of the underlying patents. Walter, who was 3 years away from his retirement and wary of undertaking massive technological overhauls, listened patiently and gave me some of the best advice of my life. He told me that Vanguard was going to be sold to private equity eventually, and that I should keep the technology registered strictly under my personal name as a financial safeguard for my future. Taking Walter's advice, I hired a boutique intellectual property law firm in Chicago that specialized in protecting independent engineers. I filed for complete federal patent protection, receiving U.S. Patent number 11,842,619b2, alongside 6 companion patents covering every mathematical algorithm, data structure, and hardware interface in the system. The patent claims specifically protected our proprietary state-machine transitions, real-time sensor calibration loops, and hardware interlock mechanisms against unauthorized commercial exploitation. I paid for every filing fee, legal review, and patent maintenance charge out of my personal bank account, maintaining strict separation between my employment duties at Vanguard and my independent research at home. When Brandon took over as vice president 2 years ago, desperate to generate impressive statistics for the private equity board, he hired an outside software consulting firm to modernize the factory. That consulting firm, lacking the deep engineering talent required to build an industrial control engine from scratch, quietly purchased a white-label automation package from an unscrupulous third-party vendor. What neither Brandon nor his high-priced consultants realized was that the vendor had illegally scraped, copied, and packaged my published patent schematics into their commercial code stack. They had even left my unique mathematical constant definitions and specific safety interlock tags, such as Varian interlock vector alpha, buried inside the compiled binaries. The vendor assumed that because my patent filings were public record, they could recompile the underlying code without purchasing a commercial license. Brandon had spent $4,500,000 of company capital buying a shiny web front-end wrapped around my stolen intellectual property. He had effectively installed a stolen engine inside his factory, fired the sole inventor who held the ignition keys, and then stood on stage bragging about his technological genius. Back in my home workshop, surrounded by the quiet hum of my tools and the rich scent of cedar wood, I sat at my desk and reviewed the certified copies of my patent deeds. I did not file an immediate lawsuit. I knew how complex industrial software functioned under real-world stress. I knew that without the master encryption keys and the specific calibration offsets stored safely on my offline hard drives, Varian Logic would treat Brandon's unauthorized servers not as a home, but as an active intruder. By Wednesday morning of the following week, the quiet corporate arrogance inside Vanguard Automation had completely dissolved into operational chaos. The sleek Varian Dynamics rollout, which Brandon had promised would run the facility with zero-touch precision, turned into an unmitigated disaster across the entire manufacturing floor. It began during the second shift on Line 3, where 6 automated robotic arms were tasked with precision welding heavy steel chassis frames for our primary commercial vehicle contract. Instead of executing their standard 3-point weld sequence, the robots suddenly began executing thermal applications in reverse order, applying intense localized heat to the weakest structural joints. Within 45 minutes, 64 high-precision chassis units, each carrying a raw material and machining cost of $6,200, were warped and twisted beyond repair. Sparks showered the concrete floor as emergency thermal sensors triggered automatic hall shutdowns, filling the main bay with the acrid stench of scorched metal, melted insulation, and burnt circuit boards. On Line 1, precision milling heads overheated and seized up on Wednesday afternoon because the software failed to trigger coolant pumps during high-speed spindle cycles, ruining $40,000 in specialized diamond tooling and warping 2 primary drive shafts. Extreme friction caused an electrical short inside the main control cabinet, emitting thick white smoke that triggered the facility fire alarms and forced local firefighters to inspect the building. On Line 2, automated conveyor belts ran at double their rated speed due to clock cycle desynchronization, spilling 1,000-pound steel pallets onto the concrete floor and nearly crushing a senior forklift operator. When line managers rushed to the main control terminal to manually override the system, they encountered a wall of incomprehensible diagnostic errors. The sleek dashboard Brandon had bragged about was flashing recursive error codes that did not exist in any standard commercial manual. Every time an operator attempted to manually input a correction vector, the system responded by locking down adjacent subroutines, flagging standard steel components as critical defects, and halting the feeder belts. By Thursday afternoon, the automated picking cranes in the primary warehouse began misclassifying inbound inventory, routing thousands of feet of high-voltage copper wiring into scrap hoppers while marking defective plastic mounting brackets as prime assembly stock. Over $396,000 in raw materials were damaged or misallocated in less than 48 hours, and Vanguard missed 3 critical delivery windows for its largest automotive client. Brandon's reaction to the crisis was aggressive, erratic, and utterly incompetent. Rather than stepping back to investigate the root cause of the software failure, he flew into a rage, summoning his senior line managers and the outside consulting team into Ronson's old office. He paced behind the mahogany desk, his face flushed bright red, screaming that his staff was willfully sabotaging his vision because they were loyal to legacy habits and resistant to modern progress. At one point, Brandon demanded that Clara Miller and the warehouse supervisors forge paper delivery manifests to falsely indicate to client auditors that shipments had left on time. Clara flatly refused to sign her name to illegal documentation, citing company ethics guidelines. Enraged, Brandon threw a full coffee cup against the whiteboard, shattering the porcelain into pieces, and demanded to know why a $4,500,000 software package was acting like a destructive virus. The lead software consultant, a young man who looked as though he had not slept in 3 days, tremblingly explained that the core architecture was not buggy but deliberately self-protecting. He reported that the underlying software contained deeply embedded cryptographic subroutines that required a specific biometric handshake and an authenticated hardware security key to release master system authority. Without those specific credentials, the software automatically interpreted unauthorized configuration attempts as a hostile breach, entering a perpetual failsafe mode that degraded operational performance by 10% every 6 hours. When the consultant asked if anyone at Vanguard held the master security credentials or understood the underlying custom syntax, a heavy silence fell over the room. Clara Miller, who was present to report logistics losses, spoke up calmly from the doorway. She reminded Brandon that the syntax in question was the exact proprietary logic developed by Elliott Vance over 2 decades of custom system integration. Brandon slammed his fist onto his desk, veins bulging along his neck, and declared that he would never crawl back to an outdated dinosaur who belonged in a museum. He ordered the consultants to force a hard rewrite of the root code by Friday morning, threatening to sue their firm for breach of contract if they failed. But forcing a code rewrite on a deeply recursive, patented system without the original source schematics is like trying to defuse a bomb with boxing gloves. By Friday evening, the entire plant had gone completely dark, every terminal displaying a static blue screen with a single unyielding message: System authority null, access denied. While Vanguard Automation was collapsing under the weight of Brandon's hubris, my life in the peaceful suburbs of Columbus had settled into a remarkably satisfying rhythm. I spent my mornings restoring vintage woodworking machinery in my spacious garage workshop, breathing in the rich scent of oak sawdust and machine oil, and enjoying long, unhurried cups of black coffee on my back porch. I had restored a 1968 South Bend metal lathe to factory perfection, crafted a custom oak dining table using traditional mortise and tenon joinery, and spent quiet afternoons brewing pour-over Ethiopian coffee while listening to classical vinyl records. I understood that true joinery, whether in wood or software engineering, requires patience, precise tolerances, and balance. I had also joined a local community craftsmanship guild, teaching young apprentices how to read manual mechanical schematics, calibrate precision micrometers, and respect the fundamental laws of physics. The constant, grinding stress that had defined my final 2 years under Brandon's toxic management was entirely gone, replaced by the deep satisfaction of working with my hands on projects that I truly owned. On Friday evening, just as the sun was dipping below the tree line and painting the Ohio sky in shades of deep amber, the landline phone on my kitchen wall began to ring. Very few people possess that number, and I let it chime 4 times before calmly picking up the receiver. On the other end was the strained, exhausted voice of Martin Koig, Vanguard's Vice President of Operations. Martin was a veteran of the manufacturing industry, a straight-shooting former Navy logistics officer who had served 20 years managing flight deck equipment on aircraft carriers before entering civilian plant management. He was a man who knew how many bolts went into a structural hinge, and he had always treated the technical staff with genuine respect. He did not use corporate jargon or pretend to understand technical systems he had not personally inspected. He took a long, heavy breath before speaking, asking if I had a few minutes to talk engineer to engineer. I leaned against my kitchen counter and told him I was always available for an old friend. Martin did not mince words or attempt to hide the truth. He confessed that the plant was in total ruin. Line 1, Line 2, and Line 3 were completely paralyzed. Over $400,000 in precision inventory had been destroyed. The smell of burnt hydraulic fluid hung in the air, and major corporate clients, like Peterson Industrial and Wilton Brothers, were pounding on the front desk, threatening immediate breach of contract lawsuits that could bankrupt Vanguard within a month. He admitted that Brandon's high-priced outside consultants had completely failed, corrupting the primary inventory database while trying to force a brute force bypass of the security layers. Martin told me that he was calling on his own authority, without Brandon's knowledge or approval, to beg me to return as a high-level private consultant for 2 weeks. He offered to pay double my old senior hourly rate directly out of the Emergency Operations Fund if I would simply come in, bypass the lockdown protocols, and restore the basic manufacturing lines to operational status. I listened to Martin with deep personal respect, but my voice remained completely unyielding and calm. I told him that I appreciated his honesty and valued the working relationship we had shared for 20 years, but a simple consulting agreement could not fix what was broken at Vanguard. I explained to him that the software currently locking down his factory was not a glitch, a virus, or a piece of legacy garbage, but Varian Logic, a fully patented technological suite owned entirely by me under federal law. I informed him that under Title 35 of the United States Code, specifically Section 271 regarding direct and inducement patent infringement, any unauthorized attempt by Vanguard or its consultants to operate or patch that software constituted a willful violation. I told him softly that my consulting rate for unauthorized corporate use of my intellectual property started at numbers that would require liquidating the company's executive stock options, and that I was currently enjoying my retirement far too much to step back into a toxic corporate war zone. Martin was silent for a long moment, the quiet realization washing over him that Vanguard was not dealing with an angry ex-employee, but an unmovable legal wall. He thanked me for my time, wished me well, and hung up the phone with the quiet resignation of a seasoned captain watching his ship go under. The final blow did not strike Vanguard Automation in the heat of a shouting match or during a dramatic board meeting. It arrived on a crisp Monday morning in the form of a heavy, embossed envelope hand-delivered to the executive reception desk by a senior courier from Rosen, Kwong & Bell, one of the premier intellectual property litigation firms in the Midwest. The formal legal notice was 34 pages long, meticulously documented with certified federal patent deeds, side-by-side code comparisons, and timestamp system logs, proving that Vanguard's Varian Dynamics platform was a direct, unauthorized derivative of my protected work. The lead document was an ironclad cease and desist demand, accompanied by a notice of federal patent infringement under Section 271 of the Patent Act, Section 106 of the Copyright Act, and federal trade secret provisions under Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1836. My attorneys were prepared to file an emergency motion for a preliminary injunction in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Ohio within 24 hours. The legal terms set forth by my attorneys were absolute and devastating. Vanguard was ordered to immediately shut down all servers running the Varian architecture, cease all attempts to bypass the security protocols, and allow an independent federal auditor full access to the premises to verify compliance within 5 business days. To avoid an immediate federal injunction that would freeze all corporate bank accounts, Vanguard was offered a choice. They could either execute a formal patent settlement and licensing agreement for a one-time fee of $38,500,000, or face a public federal trial for treble damages under Section 284, attorney fees under Section 285, and personal executive liability for corporate officer misconduct. Furthermore, the settlement contained a non-negotiable personal clause. Brandon Mercer was required to issue a written public retraction and apology in Manufacturing Today and Tech Operations Weekly, explicitly acknowledging that he had fired the sole inventor of the technology he tried to steal, and admitting that his claims regarding legacy inefficiency were completely false. When the legal demand hit the board of directors, the fallout was instantaneous and merciless. The private equity investors who had funded Brandon's appointment realized that their $4,500,000 tech investment was completely worthless and legally toxic. Within 48 hours, the board convened an emergency session, grilled Brandon on his failure to perform due diligence on the vendor, stripped him of all executive authority, and had security escort him out of the building without a severance package. The Corporate Communications Department issued a brief, embarrassed press release announcing Brandon's departure due to management realignments, while major industrial news outlets picked up the story, citing it as a textbook example of corporate hubris and executive incompetence in the age of automated manufacturing. Unable to afford the $38 million licensing fee or survive the mounting client lawsuits, Vanguard's parent company placed the entire facility into emergency liquidation, selling off the physical machinery and real estate to pay off their creditors. 3 months later, I sat in the sunlit office of my newly established engineering firm, Vance Intellectual Property Solutions. Clara Miller sat across from me, having accepted a position as my chief operations director, while Martin Koig served as our senior logistics advisor. My firm had officially acquired the physical assets of the old Vanguard plant at a liquidation auction for pennies on the dollar, converting it into a clean, modern research center where veteran engineers and young talents work together with mutual respect. We rehired the laid-off line workers with higher wages, comprehensive benefits, and a generous profit-sharing model, restoring human dignity to the factory floor. We also established a regional patent assistance foundation to help independent inventors protect their creations against corporate infringement. Sitting at my mahogany desk, looking out over the quiet Ohio landscape, I took a slow sip of hot coffee and smiled. I had not sought revenge through noise, sabotage, or petty anger. I had simply built something of genuine value, protected it with relentless legal discipline, and let an arrogant man destroy himself against the immovable truth of my work.